Our company started in 1967. My father started it, and he was the only employee, and I was his helper. And about 2 to 3 weeks after he started, we had our first employee that was not an owner, is Alfonso Torres. He owns a nice sheet metal shop here in San Leandro now, but 30 years ago, basically my father was a sheet metal tradesman, and he bought the machines that he could get by with to manufacture simple chassis and brackets, things of that nature. You know, a shear, a couple of kick presses, drill press, sander, press brake, things like that. Just the very basics. And he made parts in those basic quantities, 10 of this, 5 of that, 20. And I think the biggest run at that time was maybe 100 pieces. But he just relied on his skills as a journeyman to manufacture the parts in accordance to the blueprint. We worked, I think, with maybe 3 employees till about 1969, when we moved into our next facility. When we moved in, rented a space from a machine shop, a working machine shop, a rather good-sized one, Eldon Associates, back then in Palo Alto. And in '69, when we were working with them, we saw how they were inspecting parts, but still the quantities that we had, my father felt it didn't require it. He was just double-checking everything that he was doing before he'd move on to the next step. And we had our mistakes. You know, I remember one time I had learned how to weld when I was 10, and one time we had an order of 75 rather large aluminum blanks where we had kick pressed the hole in the wrong location. They were almost square, so we indexed them incorrectly, and they were 1/8 inch thick aluminum, and it was pretty good size for a small shop like that to just scrap. And my job was to countersink it and fill the hole up, grind it, sand it smooth, and get ready to put the right hole in the right place. But in 1969, we moved to Redwood City, and we were completely autonomous from everybody else. We were in our own facility. It was 2,000 square feet, and at that time, Redwood City was where Ampex was, which is where my father used to work. That's where he learned his skill for 15 years working there, and he had a number of friends that still worked there, and one of them was an inspector, John Iquinto. So what happened when we moved to Redwood City is my father asked John if he would come to Spaceonics after he was finished with his shift at Ampex as an inspector and work a couple of hours part-time for him to help him out. And he did. He agreed to that, and that went on. Wow, that went on for almost 8 years. So everything that we would do during the day that could be staged for this inspector to verify in the evening, we would do. At that time, we were using what we called templomatics, where you make a template and you index a index pin. It's, you know, prior to the NC Turret punch presses. So we would make the layouts, and before we would punch the layout, we would save the layout for the inspector to come to verify that the layout was correct. Then when he was finished verifying all those first articles of layouts, he would check bent and formed up parts to make sure that we were holding dimensions and tolerances and things of that nature. But there wasn't an on-site inspector. We were still basically running the same way we had always run, where my father and the guys on the floor were moving forward based on their knowledge of the blueprints. And during the summers at that time, I would go ahead and verify what they were doing because I was the layout man. I mean, the inspector was checking my layouts at the time. And shoot, at that time I was, I guess about 13 to about 16 or 17, yeah, and I'm the layout man for this shop. But it was fun. It was a good time. Let's see, when we moved out of there, we were about 14 employees, and we moved into a larger facility. It was about 7,000 square feet, and that's when we started to have an on-site inspector. I don't recall exactly when, but now we had 14 employees when we moved in there, and gradually we were growing. So a lot of scrap would be made if you didn't watch all this. And you know, trying to watch over everything was very difficult. As a matter of fact, at that time, when we moved into that facility, I was 21, and I remember I would try to get there at 6:30 in the morning because the crew started at 8 o'clock. And I would set up press brakes, I would set up the the duplicators, I would set up the kick presses so that when the guys would show up, I'd be able to tell them on which machines to go ahead and go and start running, and I would have already verified my setup. But during the course of the day, of course, those setups would run through, and the guys would change their setups, make their own, and take it over to inspection to verify it. But mainly it was a final inspection because I was roaming, making sure everything was going along okay. Because, 7,000 square feet isn't that big. And then the shift would be over. We would work everybody as much overtime as we could or required at that time. And then I would stay to try to work on jobs that only I could work on, not being interrupted at the time, just some crazy jobs, tubular, soldering, or things that weren't really just formed up or punched sheet metal, but there was good money in it. And if there was time, I'd start setting up machines, so in the morning I didn't have so many machines to set up. But boy, I remember my father would show up 8:15, 8:30, and he'd walk around the shop, and there'd be a setup almost halfway run, and he'd make us pull it because it just wasn't the way he wanted to see it set up, yet it held dimension, it held tolerance. But that was his way of teaching me or teaching us the right way to set up a machine or a bending machine.